Hi everyone. If you don't mind, we're going to get started. It's a little bit past 1, so if everyone could get settled, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you everyone for coming today. Welcome on this beautiful day to South Hall. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a little bit of context for sort of the CLTC seminar series and the organization behind events like this one. So we're the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. So we're a research and collaboration hub that's housed here in the School of Information in South Hall. And we were founded in 2015 by a generous grant from the Hewlett Foundation. So since then, we sort of work in 3 main buckets in order to sort of become, and with the aim of becoming sort of the place for people to come when addressing issues about the future and the long-term implications of cybersecurity. So first we do research, and we fund a lot of projects across campus here in the Berkeley campus. And this year we were very happy to fund 27 teams of researchers who are working on a huge variety of projects ranging from the implications of cybersecurity on artificial intelligence to a couple of projects on the cybersecurity talent pipeline, which we are talking about today. The second sort of bucket of activities that we work on are policy engagement. So we're an organization that doesn't really like to be just in the ivory tower. We regularly make trips out to DC to engage with policymakers and legislators to sort of help be a resource to these people as they are shaping the cybersecurity policy landscape. And finally, we also are very, very passionate about education. So one of the issues that we really want to address in both our research and our engagement is the cybersecurity talent pipeline and bringing diverse perspectives and backgrounds into this space. So in addition to holding seminars like this one, which are open to the public, we also are in the process of designing a one-day training for women and minorities to lateral into this space. And we hope initiatives like this can help address like the increasingly widening gap in the cybersecurity workforce. So we're particularly excited to invite Emily Reid out here today because we think she'll be able to speak very, very well to this problem, as she worked previously as the Director of Education at Girls Who Code, which is an organization that is hoping to address gender diversity in the broader computer science space. She holds a master's degree in computer science from Columbia and previously worked at MITRE Corporation as an engineer in the cybersecurity division. So she'll have a lot to say about not just the tech space, but also cybersecurity in particular. And so she now works as an independent consultant, advising startups and working on projects to advance computer science education and AI learning platforms. So without further ado, we would like to welcome Emily Reid. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Kristen. Thank you to Kristen and Betsy and everyone for having me here. I'm really excited to talk to you today because I think you guys are all the people who can be part of the solution to this problem that I'm going to talk about. So my subtitle for this talk is How I Learned to Start Worrying and Love a Chicken and Egg Problem. I believe that when we talk about pipeline, it kind of seems as though we're talking about things that are the way they are, and the pipeline that's coming in isn't what we need it to be. But this really is a cycle. And so that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. My plan for today is basically to give you a little bit of an overview of this issue, some of the data that's out there that we have, a few of my personal stories and some opinions on what I think needs to change in the space. And then finally, I'm going to give a couple specific things that you can do in order to help address this problem. And I have a number of great organizations and resources that will be good for you to know about if this is something that you want to take action on. So why am I the person talking to you about this today? As Kristen mentioned, I'll keep this short because you heard a bit, but I studied math and computer science. When I was studying this, I was very concerned about the gender gap that I saw in my classes and just the general lack of diversity in my computer science courses. It was always definitely less than that of the university that I was at, and I was pretty concerned, like, why is this happening and how can we change it? When I graduated from college, I joined a company called the MITRE Corporation. They do government research and developments. They run federally funded research and development centers. I was part of the cybersecurity division there, actually in the cryptography group. So I loved it there. I worked on a really large range of projects. There were a few that I worked on that were public, so like the Common Vulnerabilities CVE project is managed at MITRE. I worked on that project there. During my time in graduate school, I had seen this issue in industry. I saw this issue in my classes, and I was getting more and more concerned about it. I've always felt that education is a way to solve most of our problems. So I got very, very interested in computer science education. For those who don't know, Girls Who Code, it's a national nonprofit trying to close the gender gap in tech by teaching mostly middle and high school girls computer science. So I got involved as a teacher for Girls Who Code when I was in graduate school. I taught the summer immersion program, which is a 7-week intensive. And I joined Girls Who Code full-time as curriculum director in 2015, was there for 2 years, and I'm still in touch and an advocate for the organization. So during this time, I learned a lot about this issue. Obviously, I came from it from the cybersecurity perspective and had experienced it there. So I have a few ideas about what I think will work. So for those who don't know, I want to give a little bit of a primer on the computer science pipeline in general, and then talk a little bit more about some specifics in cybersecurity. So from a gender perspective, there's a few things that we know. The percentage of women studying computer science has gone in the wrong direction for the last 30 years. So this chart I have shows these two spikes of study of computer science. You'll note that this first spike kind of aligns with the release of the personal computer. This is like .com and World Wide Web. So we see that women were a part of this spike in the 80s. This makes sense because women had always been involved in computers and in programming computers since that was something that one could do. And so it's not surprising that women were a part of that. There are a lot of different ideas about why this spike then didn't happen in the 90s, and I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more at Q&A if anyone wants to dig into it. But part of what happens and why this is a chicken and egg problem is that we had women leaving the industry not majoring in computer science in the 90s. So then you have fewer female software engineers, fewer women at tech companies, and you have a lot fewer of these role models. So you have girls coming up, not able to identify role models, not knowing that this is something that they can do, and then we're in this cycle. So what Girls Who Code was doing was really trying to address that problem. When we look at the breakdown for computer science in terms of racial and ethnic groups, the numbers are really dismal as well. So these are numbers from 2014, and when you look at Black students studying computer science, Hispanic students, multiracial, Native, we're usually in the single digits or less. Some of these are less than 1%. So definitely underrepresentation in terms of these groups in studying computer science. So we have this problem at the college level. It's then not very surprising that when we get to the workforce, that the numbers are also pretty dismal. Fortunately, there's been a bit of a trend in the last couple of years after a lot of public pressure for companies to release their diversity information. Uber just gave some last week. But what I hear from from some tech companies is, okay, there's this pipeline issue. You know, we want to hire a more diverse group, but they're just not there. And I think that while that is true, there is a lot that companies can do to help address this problem, because we know that it's a cycle. So these companies, what they need to be able to do is they need to, first of all, make sure that their hiring and recruiting practices are fair and unbiased. They need to make sure that the environments that their workers are in are ones where everyone can thrive. And they need to, the last thing that they need to do is they need to have their engineers take time, go out and talk to students, or they need to bring students into their labs and have them meet engineers and learn more about their projects, because most of what these students need, at least to begin with, is exposure, and they need to know that this is an option. We would see this time and time again in Girls Who Code, that exposure and that having that role model, while hopefully we're doing a lot more than that, that's one of the most impactful things that you can do. That's how this starts. So if a student is maybe considering computer science, or maybe doesn't even know what it is yet, but they have a speaker come in and that speaker looks like them or talks like them or has an interest that they share, they can identify more with that person and think to themselves, okay, if they can do it, then I can do it too. So from a cybersecurity perspective, what do we know that may be a little bit different in this space? So some of the data that you'll see, usually you'll see about 10 or 11% as the percentage of women in cybersecurity. This is a global number, I want to note that. So if this is the case, then it is a bit less than what we see in computer science. Raytheon has done a few interesting studies on this in terms of just understanding what is the interest in cybersecurity as a career path. I found this number at 24% were interested in cybersecurity, and 32% of, this is adults age 18 to 26, were interested in app development. So I find this interesting because most folks who are maybe thinking about tech as a career, they've maybe seen what an app developer might be on TV, even if they don't know that much about what's actually involved. But they've used apps before. They have more exposure to it. When we talk about cybersecurity, they don't have quite as much exposure to it. They're not sure what that means. They're not sure what it looks like, right? So I think that this is part of the problem, one of the things that cybersecurity in particular needs to address. I thought these numbers were pretty staggering about just exposure to computers, to cybersecurity, and understanding of cybersecurity as a potential career path. So between about 2/3 and 3/4 of students had no teacher or guidance counselor mention this option to them. Obviously, even more women did not have exposure to this. And about that same number of students did not have any kind of resources at their school, were not taking cybersecurity classes. We're still in the phase of trying to get computer science, period, in every high school, and we're still not there yet. But this is something that I think we need to make sure that cybersecurity is a part of that conversation for two reasons. We want the code that the students write to be secure. I think that we can all agree that that could be important. But we want students to know that this is an area, when they're thinking about tech and they're thinking about computer science, and they're thinking about the different areas that they could go into, they're considering security as well. So in preparing for this talk, I wanted to make sure that I had the most recent data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I actually had a little bit of trouble unpacking this information, so I decided to just put it all in one graph and share it with you and see what you think. If you have thoughts that I didn't consider about why this data may look the way it does, I would love to hear it. So I was starting from 2016 back, and so in 2016, oh, and by the way, one of the challenges with data in this space is that we call this work all different kinds of things. We have lots of different names for this, right? I see a lot of people nodding. I remember when I started at MITRE, everyone's title was information security engineer, and that changed to cybersecurity engineer. So the title that is closest in the Bureau of Labor Statistics site is information security analyst. In 2016, I was comparing 2016 and 2015 data. And I said, okay, so there's a slight uptick in percentage of women. Note, by the way, that this number is larger than the global number that we saw before. And then I was looking at the percentage of Black or African American in this column. And I said, wow, it tripled in 2016. That's incredible. How did that happen? And then I looked at 2014, and the percentage was higher in 2014. So I was a little unsure what to make of this. I think that This title appears for the first time in Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2011, and in 2011 and 13 there was not enough data to share the percentages. So it may be an issue of the sample size is just not quality enough, but I found that a little hard to imagine. So I wasn't entirely sure what to make of these, especially you can see the percentage Black or African American and percentage Asian categories in 2012 were even higher. So I was not able to find a lot of work on analysis of this. So I wanted to share it with you, and if anyone has thoughts at Q&A, I would love to hear them. One of the kind of beacons of light that I saw in one of the Raytheon studies was that there has been very recently a bit more growing interest in cybersecurity. So this is one study, but I found it potentially heartening. So they were looking at adults age 18 to 26, and there was a 6% spike in percentage of women who were interested in cybersecurity as a career path and 10% for men. Obviously, I would like to see that number be equal for both groups. However, I think that this could potentially be due to the fact that we are just a lot more open now. We're hearing a lot more about attacks. We're hearing a lot more about companies are sharing a lot more of the attacks that they've had. We know a lot more about what the risks are, and this has been more widely reported on. So I think that might be part of it. I also think that maybe people are watching Mr. Robot. That's the other possibility. So one of the issues that I think is specific to cybersecurity and is a very huge problem in the industry is the culture at security conferences. So this is not unique to cybersecurity for sure. This is an issue in tech in general. But I think that the reputation that certain conferences have gotten in cybersecurity are pretty staggering. DEF CON for sure has been one of the ones that is most widely reported on. Black Hat also, and say RSA a bit to a lesser degree. Fortunately, there's been a lot more reporting on what's been going on. People have been sharing their stories, and a lot more has come to light. Some conferences have taken more steps. I know that I think in 2014, RSA started banning booth babes. On the left is this is a letter I actually wrote to the Financial Times on a story they did on DEF CON. The story that they did came out in right after I had finished teaching for Girls Who Code. And I had a ton of students who I had actually added in a couple cybersecurity lessons for them. And they got really excited about security, and they wanted to learn a lot more, and they were like, where can I go for more? What conferences can I go to? What workshops can I go to? Are there hackathons I can go to? And I was reading this article, and it talked about all the great things about DEF CON, and there are some great things in terms of open and creative technology. But it didn't mention this harassment issue at all, which had been pretty widely reported on at that point. And I said, I cannot in good confidence recommend this conference to my students. And that's a problem, because these conferences are great in terms of research that's being shared, tech that's being shared, networking opportunities, job opportunities. So this is something that I see as a specific issue for security that needs to be addressed if we're going to make this a safe space for everyone.
Can I ask just a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious why you describe this as an idiosyncratic barrier as opposed to an institutional and systemic barrier.
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe that wasn't the right word. I do think that obviously harassment in general is an institutional issue, or I believe that. I guess I was thinking of the word idiosyncratic, so I was thinking about tech specifically, and what are some things about security that I think are particular challenges there. So from that perspective, I was thinking, what are some things that when we're thinking about the pipeline and security that we really need to address, and this is one of the top things that I thought of. But thank you. So we know a bit about this data. We know a bit about some of the things that we need to change in security. Why do we care about it? Obviously, I think we should care about it because it's the right thing to do, but also there are serious economic stakes. So The projections for cybersecurity jobs and the growth of the cybersecurity industry is pretty enormous. I think that this is happening because companies are either finally prioritizing security or finally in a place where they can prioritize security. You see more incident response teams, more CSOs being hired. So there's going to be a lot of jobs that are unfilled. This is true in tech in general, so we need more people, period. But we definitely need that to be a more diverse group. So you're all either members of the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity or involved with the center in some way. So I doubt that I need to convince you of the value of why we need to prioritize security. And this is something that obviously a lot of companies struggle with prioritizing. But the risks are huge. So for the sake of argument, we're talking about personally identifiable information. We're talking about infrastructure. We're talking about political systems that are at risk if we don't value security. We also know that diverse groups make better decisions. So if we have products and systems and infrastructure that we needed yesterday, that better be effective. Oh, sorry, I thought it was just a question. So these are the reasons why I think this is really important and something that needs to be addressed in the near future. So I want to talk briefly a little bit about my own personal experience. These are two photos from those two different times in my life. This is me with a group of my colleagues at a conference we presented at through MITRE in Tallinn, Estonia. And this is my Girls Who Code classroom at the end of the summer. So in terms of my own personal experience, I loved the work that I had at MITRE. There was a really large range of projects. I got interested, I was telling someone before the break, I got into security because of actually the math that I was interested in. That led me to cryptography, and I kind of got more and more technical over time. So I think security is fascinating because, and particularly for young people coming up who are thinking about exciting career paths, there are so many opportunities in security. There's such a wide range of things that they can do. And it's an exciting field that's going to be constantly changing. We're obviously always in a bit of this arms race, right, between kind of black hat and white hat. So there's always going to be work. I experienced, I think, things that are pretty typical of women in tech, unfortunately. I didn't think, in terms of my own personal experience, that there was anything particular or particularly different, but I found one of the things that I found became a habit for me over time, especially after going to these conferences, was that I would need to, whenever I met someone, introduce myself with my title. And I needed to say, I'm Emily Reid, I'm a cybersecurity engineer. Because especially if I was at a conference, I would usually be assumed to be in the sales or marketing departments, neither of which exists at MITRE. I see a lot of heads too. So I found that that was something that I needed to do to set the tone right away. Like I said, a lot of the things that I experienced were unfortunately pretty common to women in tech, despite really good feedback and working super late nights all the time. I was passed over for important projects. When I actually went to a manager about a promotion, I was met with kind of surprise about wanting to be promoted, which I found to be very odd. So I had a couple of experiences that really bothered me and are kind of what motivated me to do more with this issue. But in terms of the work that I was doing, I loved it. And so I think that this is why this is so important. We need to remove these barriers so that people can get to the work. In Girls Who Code, it's interesting because during my time there, we added more and more security content into the curriculum. So the students in the summer program do a open-ended project at the end of the year. And I would see more and more security projects. Usually they were just doing some kind of cool app, but for the most part, I would start to see year after year that there were a few more security projects. And like I said, I had students kind of asking me at the end of the year, you know, what else can I do? Where can I go to learn more about this? So this is something that I found that, girls come in and they're interested, they've like heard about hacking, they don't really know what it is, they've maybe heard about cybersecurity, but they don't really know what it is. And there's kind of a hunger there, and then once they get exposed to it, they really kind of take off with it. And so we've had a few students who've taken, we now have more and more students in college, so we've seen some of them take advantage of like the scholarships for security. There's a lot of scholarship opportunities in this space. So I know that it's something that once we get exposure and support for more diverse groups, that it will be taken advantage of. So what do I think is needed? Like I said, I think one of the most impactful things that can be done is these exposure opportunities and having more role models and mentors in cybersecurity. I don't think that's the only thing that we need, but I do think it's the first step, and it's one of the most impactful ones. The other thing I was discussing with Stephen earlier, so some of the data around this, like I said, is either a little bit difficult to interpret, or we don't have it year after year, or we're calling it something different every year. And it makes it a little more challenging to figure out what we can do to address the problem and where it's improving and where it's not. So I would love to see there to be more quality data and analysis on that data. And finally, we need to continue to scrutinize the industry. Fortunately, there have been more folks coming out and sharing what their experiences have been and reporting on those experiences, but we need a lot more of that in order to shine a light on this. So what can you do? So if you're here and you have security experience or technical experience or just interest, you have something that you can share with students who may be potential cybersecurity engineers or analysts in the future. On the next page, I'm going to share a few organizations that I've either worked with or would recommend or have heard are great resources. So I would encourage you to take a look at each of those and follow them. I know that most of these organizations run programs that always need teachers. One of my jobs at Girls Who Code was to hire and train the teachers for our thousands of clubs and 100 summer immersion programs. So I can tell you from my firsthand experience that there is a huge need for good teaching in this area. And even just anyone who is interested in this space and can come and share their experience. So if you're not able to do a huge commitment or don't have a lot of teaching experience, even just going to a high school or middle school and talking to a teacher and saying, can I have half an hour to share with your coding club what my experience has been and what I do, that can have a humongous impact. So I think that's one of the minimum things that you can do. There are a lot of coding programs, learning how to code programs out there right now. In terms of security programs for, let's say, middle and high school students, there's not a ton. There are some areas that are doing this really well, but it's not widespread enough yet. So if you are thinking about starting something, anyone in the audience who is thinking about that, I would highly encourage you to do it. There need to be more people creating programs and doing work in this space. And if there's something else that you know about that either I haven't included here, please let me know and be happy to reshare it, but just share it with people who you know who are interested in this space, because this is something I hope to see a lot more growth in. And finally, of course, just to be vigilant. So I always say this to anyone who is hiring, or let's say if you run a research project, make sure that you're keeping this in mind when you're recruiting students or hiring employees, or if you see something in your organization that may be a threat to this pipeline, please make sure to take action on it. So these are a few of the resources. I've included mostly a mix of some that are just beginner specific for everyone and a few that are focused on underrepresented groups. I believe these slides will be shared, right? Yes, yeah. So you can, these are all, I have the links in all of these as well. And then on the right, there's a few of the general computer science or tech programs that I know that are really good. So please feel free to take a look at those. I know that some of them have security content, but not all. And these are just a few data sources if anyone wants to check me or wants to use them themselves. And that's all. Thank you guys very much. Yeah. So I would love to take questions now. You and then Stephen.
I just have a question about whether you know of any organizations, big or small, public or private, who are doing this well. Like they've created cultures that are inclusive, they are able, to the extent possible, to recruit different types of people to do technical or even cybersecurity jobs. We're always on the hunt for, you know, and whether they figured it out sort of through intentional, you know, programs, or they got lucky, or whatever it might be. Are you aware of any such organizations?
In security specifically, or in tech in general?
If you, like, you know, I mean, one could argue, well, it'd be hard to make the argument about Silicon Valley companies. They try, maybe some of them do, but not so successfully.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's sort of rumors, like, you know, for example, Etsy, not in the security space, may have done a good job, although I don't think I've ever seen any data on that.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Etsy thing is very interesting because I knew someone who was an engineer there and had a really terrible experience, and then is involved with the Women Eng group at Uber and said that she had a better experience there. And obviously that's not right. And obviously that's not what is our vision of that from what else has been shared. And so I think I don't want, basically what I don't want to do is say yes based on just an individual experience, right? So to be honest with you, I'm like racking my brain. I think that I know that there are a lot of organizations out there that are really trying and are giving it a good effort, but I can't say that I can think of one place that I could say is like they're doing it right. They're successful, unfortunately.
Thanks.
Yeah. What's your name?
Jesse.
Jesse. Nice to meet you. Yeah. Stephen.
There's a question about the job category specifications.
Yeah.
We talk about it with people. So I would put the BLS categories aside, because everyone knows the BLS categories kind of suck. And it's not only true in science everywhere, so that's hard. But as you talk about it to people, on the one hand, you can imagine sort of one way of talking about it is there is a cybersecurity trajectory, jobs. On the other hand, there is computer science, of which cybersecurity becomes a sort of secondary subject.
Yeah.
In the same way, it's like in the medical profession, there's a huge gender imbalance among surgeons. But typically people don't go out and say, you should learn to be a surgeon.
Right.
You should learn to be a doctor. Oh, and then once you're in that, isn't surgery interesting?
Right.
Right, so those are two really different ways of approaching.
Right.
And I just wonder if you have a point of view on that, or if there's any data on how people talk to people about it making any difference in that.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things, I don't have specific data on this, from my kind of anecdotal experience, I would say that at Girls Who Code, when we would have students come in and we would give them a variety of areas that they could go into in computer science, we would get a lot more general interest. I had even tried to kind of steer us away from the you go and be a software engineer. And that's a wonderful thing to go and be, and that's where most of the jobs are, sure, but we kind of had an overemphasis on that and less emphasis, say, on like being a researcher or working in AI or natural language processing or kind of a lot of these like sub areas. And I do think that sharing kind of the diversity of jobs that you can go into will attract a lot more students, because every time they hear about a new job, they start to understand the diversity of the space. So I think that potential cybersecurity engineer, you're going to be more likely to reach, even if you're just sharing a variety of jobs that maybe don't even necessarily include security. But I do think that the more, so then, yeah, the question, I think security is interesting too, because it has a bit of a, there are folks who come and work in cybersecurity who came from more of like an IT background than a computer science background as well. So I think that because it's this field that kind of overlaps with a few others, it's also, we can't just basically be relying on like the computer science funnel. So I think I just said yes and no. But I think that basically if we can be out there sharing as many jobs as possible that are available in computer science and be talking about security, we kind of need to pull on both levers, I think. Yeah. Yes.
So first of all, thank you for this wonderful presentation. And indeed, there is a recent report suggesting the 5 biggest barriers for women in tech in general, not in cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. Lack of mentorship, lack of female role models, all these issues you suggested and talked about, but they also talk about bias in the workplace and inequality in,
Yeah.
wage. And we are, I think it's inequality payday or equality payday today, or there's a big effort around that, around these issues this week. And I wonder, what's your take on how can we diverse the pipeline in terms of addressing these specific barriers of bias in the workplace, and how can we get information about the wage, and how can we create more equality in where it matters, which is sometimes also in the wallet, right?
So this is an issue in the workplace, period. It's definitely an issue in tech, and it's definitely an issue in cybersecurity. So I think it's a pretty big. I don't have a very quick solution just to that, but I think that like one of the things I mentioned was making sure that both the hiring process and I think promotion processes are one that's really come under light, making sure that those are unbiased. And we need to forget the idea that this is a meritocratic system. That's often what's said about tech, and actually what the research shows is that people who say that tend to be less, it actually tends to be less of a meritocracy the more that you say that. So I think that, but there's also, unfortunately, I've seen a lot more data recently that shows that like bias training doesn't necessarily work, and actually can make people feel that what they're doing is okay, because we all have these biases, right? So I'm not entirely sure what the solution is to that. I think that I still think it may be part of the solution. I think people need to know that this exists, and need to forget the idea that this is meritocratic. The Atlantic article, were you talking about the Atlantic article or a different one?
I think it was published in the Atlantic, but it's a report done by, so I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right, but ISCA, it's ISACA.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Well, there was an article in Atlantic just this past month's issue entitled "Why is Silicon Valley So Awful to Women?" And they had the example of Tracy Chu when she was at Pinterest, basically like finding a bug in the code and needing to go around and socialize it and push it, and people only believed her that there would need to be this change in the code once like 2 of her male engineers saw it and told people. So I mean, I've been working on this issue for a while. I think that it's really complicated, and I don't think that there are single solutions. But I do think that once we are getting more, once we're getting a more diverse group in the workplace, and those are the people who are making management decisions, are making hiring decisions, making promotion decisions, starting companies, that we will make a lot more progress. I don't think that it will go away then. But I think that's the first place to start. Yeah, Betsy.
Yeah, I want to go back to Jesse's question, which I thought was really interesting. So if there are no great examples, and we're sort of a future-oriented organization, so I want to ask you to try to imagine what that workplace might look like.
Right.
So one of the things that I've noticed when we visit, Silicon Valley offices, for instance, and I always use Palantir as the example, they have the gym equipment out in front, right next to the desks. And what women are going to do gym jobs in front of all of their male colleagues, right? Or, the video game selection is all shoot 'em up games, which tend not to be exactly the type of video game that I would prefer to play. So I'm wondering if you were designing a workplace that you think would be conducive, what would that look like?
Yeah, this is interesting. So when I started working at Girls Who Code, it was the first time where I had worked with mostly women before. I had never had that experience in my whole life. I'd never had classes with mostly women. I'd never worked with mostly women. So I kind of got to see it from this completely from this other side. Our CEO then made a really big point about making sure that I think actually one of the examples in the Atlantic article was, women don't want to create food for their babies in where they're going to do their business. They want like a separate room. Like, think about it from this perspective. If companies even have a breastfeeding room, it's usually just like a bathroom stall. So I think that's one place to start, is making sure that for parents in general, that it's a place where kind of both of those identities are confirmed, and we're not just kind of giving you a second-class space. I do think that when I think about the space in general, I also think that the move toward a lot of these like super open office spaces that are all just completely open, that is something that kind of then invites a lot more of the let me come up behind and check your code, or I think that's a little bit more of kind of like an introvert-extrovert issue, but that's just something I would love to see in a lot more companies, that we don't have all completely open office spaces, or at least that there are more quiet spaces that are available for people who need to do like deep work.
Do you think that poses a problem for women when they're, like, what are you thinking of that would be the problem with these spaces?
Yeah, so I was actually thinking another one of these examples, and I've heard like this happened to me, and it's happened to friends of mine, that like say someone then can just come up behind them and look at their code and start criticizing it, and basically not have a completely safe space to do that work, and that environment may work better for folks who already are in kind of a more privileged situation. I think. So I think that kind of looking for those indicators of like the gym or the video games are kind of a first step, but and the culture, I think the culture of the place is still one piece, but I think that I still would want to put a lot more emphasis on just making sure that in terms of management practices, that's really what's kind of being prioritized, because I think that kind of culture helps the rest of the physical culture that you see fall more into place. I do think the physical culture of a company will have an effect, but I think that it tends to be more of a result of the preferable structure than the effect of it, if that makes sense. Yeah. Cool. Yes, you had a question?
Great talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One thing I've noticed lately is, so Berkeley, as a number of other schools, we have programs that are looking at addressing the pipeline problem, reaching down into high schools, middle schools, and so forth. And one of the things that when we've written proposals and so forth for some of these, oftentimes we're asked about, are these programs evidence-based? And, you know, is it just not some notion that this is going to help something, but you actually have some data for it?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you have some experience with either with Girls Who Code or some other programs that have done longitudinal studies or some other things to actually get some real data that shows some of these initiatives, you know, that quantifies the impact of some of these.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we did have this at Girls Who Code. Some of the issue with part of the organizations is that a lot of them have only been around for a few years. Girls Who Code was started in 2012. But we started doing longitudinal studies, and we're getting more data back at the time that I left from students who were graduating college, or you start with students in middle school or high school, so we're only getting now data back about them going into the workplace just now. But one of the things that we found for our summer immersion program that it was really effective. We had students who would come into the program as very beginner program, and they're all going into junior or senior year of high school. And what we would measure once they got into college was, are they either majoring in computer science, and did they have a different intended path? Because part of the issue is obviously that a student who is interested in a program like Girls Who Code is maybe already considering this. So we have a little bit of that kind of like confirmation bias, but that's one of the ways that we were able to try to address it. And the numbers there were that like 94% of the students were majoring or minoring in computer science or a related discipline like computer engineering, and that 77% I think of them had a different intended path before Girls Who Code. So I know that that's something that the organization is still invested in and is working on, and has it's kind of trying to build out more of like an R&D sort of thing. NC WIT has some pretty good information on this. They're one of the organizations that's been in the space the longest from the gender perspective. So I know that they have some pretty good studies and a fairly sizable like research team. I do think that there needs to be more, and part of it, again, is just that a lot of these organizations have cropped up just in the last few years. But I was kind of troubled generally by the fact that a lot of them are focused just on how many students we're exposing to. And X number of students were on our platform, or X number of students showed up at a workshop that we did. And that's great, and I do think that you need exposure to start with, but it's not enough.
Not meaningful or not.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think there needs to be more in this space. Thank you. Yeah.
Curious on your thoughts about struggling a little bit with the pipeline analogy, which I know is common.
Yeah.
But sticking with it, either broadening the pipeline in the sense this sort of dovetails off of Steve's question in terms of fields other than comp sci, IT, both on the input side in terms of exposing, having law students, for example, have some recognize that code isn't magic, even if you don't do it, it is a tractable problem, and that sort of diminish the taboo around the field. But also on and maybe this gets more towards the mentoring side of, given this huge gap in supply versus demand, people in these organizations who aren't traditionally in the IT crowd are getting pulled into cybersecurity functions from the legal department or elsewhere, other technical fields, but not technical in the context of software engineering per se. And so is there an opportunity there? And if so, how would you think about it in terms of both input, but also building sort of greater depth of bench of mentors and role models from other fields into this space, however we try to define this tent of security?
Right, that's great. And I agree, I do think there are some challenges with the pipeline analogy. That's why I wanted to talk about that kind of cycle part of it, because I think that it tends to we think that it's really just this linear issue, and it's not. But that's a great point too, kind of how we kind of bring folks in who are already in the workplace. There are a number of programs out there that are already kind of focused on doing that for folks who are moving between jobs, who just want to go and learn how to code, or they want to become software engineers. I do think that because, like you said, because of the interdisciplinary nature of cybersecurity, there are a few folks from the Law Center, and I think that I definitely think that there's an opportunity there. I think that we may be able to, I had been personally focused more on like kind of the high school and middle school level, and that's where I've done most of the work. But from my own experience in that workplace, I had seen a few people who had done more like systems administration, and then did a lot of security work for that job, and then they learned more programming and they became cybersecurity engineers. I definitely think it would be huge from a legal perspective, because there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and those are fields that certainly have some of their own issues, but don't have as much extreme gender imbalance as computer science does. So yes, I think there's definitely an opportunity for that, and I know that this is something the center is working on, so I think that's excellent. I would love to see more programs like the Learn How to Code ones, the ones that are like how to become a software engineer. I think that there's definitely a space for that.
Any last questions?
Just going off that real quick. So in terms of the cybersecurity field, jobs that don't necessarily involve the technical aspect of coding, then what are jobs that are available in cybersecurity that don't have to do with that?
Oh, I guess what I was saying is that I do think that you can teach that. But there are jobs that, so for like a system administrator, they need to like employ security mechanisms. They need to make sure that their systems are up to date. They need to have processes. So they're not necessarily programming. They're usually doing like a certain amount of scripting, but they're not necessarily doing the kind of like heavy programming that a software engineer would do. But I guess in terms of that answer, I was saying that I think that you could make programs that were how to go into security, and that would include, aren't just the how to become a software engineer program, but would probably include the computer science and programming aspect as well. But there are folks who I've seen who come from security from these not less technical, but disciplines that don't necessarily involve as much programming. So thank you, because that clarified my last question. I didn't mean to say that. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I'm trying to track. It sounds like you're addressing how to pivot toward cybersecurity once you're in the workplace or from middle school, high school. And I'm wondering if you have a picture of what happens in undergraduate that puts the word out or is a track that people can pivot from social sciences or from
Yeah, so I think there has been, I know that there's some work like this at Berkeley. I've seen this at other universities where I think that you can take computer science and programming and apply it to so many different disciplines. That was like our educational philosophy at Girls Who Code, was whatever you're interested in, computer science is going to affect it in some way, and you can combine those interests somehow. So I've seen that, say, for like social science programs for folks learning like how to code in R or do some more do some kind of like machine learning on their data. So I think that there is a huge opportunity for that at the undergraduate level. What has worked, I've seen in like Harvey Mudd, for example, they have like 2 different levels of intro to computer science, and intro to computer science or data structures or some of those early courses are the ones that tend to weed students out. So they take more of that interdisciplinary approach in that course, and it works better. So those students tend to stay. So I think that, yeah, I agree. I think that's a great approach for the undergraduate level. Yeah.
All right, well.
Thank you all so much. It was so wonderful to hear from you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to Kristen for doing all the work organizing this.
Thank you everyone for coming. And we have a very exciting event next Tuesday evening at 4 p.m. at the Bancroft Hotel. It's going to be on cybersecurity policy, and we're partnering with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. So if you guys are interested in cybersecurity policy, I would highly encourage that you come out.